This is the BEMA Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we are with Reed Dent to dive into the first of our vices, lust.
What a place. Just we're not pulling any punches. Why play it safe? Why not jump right in here to the deep end?
Not actually the first one we've recorded, though, so I already know that it doesn't really get much better from here, Marty.
Oh, Danger is my middle name. It's not true. Reed is actually my middle name. A lot of people don't realize that, but I do go by my middle name.
Reed Danger Dent.
So the good news is that the listeners, this is their first vice they're experiencing, but the team has already gotten warmed up. We'll put it that way.
That's right. And one of the things that the listeners are going to find is that I'm opening each of these vices with a sort of cold open of sorts,
all right,
which we've already ruined because you jumped in
Dang it.
made that joke. But that's a good joke. We're going to share a little bit of just something from somewhere, and then we're going to have our daily Beekner because he writes about each of the vices. And it would be a real shame if I didn't actually use all of those. So we're going to start with Augustine. You ever read his Confessions at all? Any of them, Marty? Or any sections of his Confessions?
They're coming up, but I haven't gotten to them yet. Like, I've perused them and interacted with them on different levels, but I have not read them from cover to cover.
I've been interacting with them more specifically because of this series. I mean, I got the book and dabbled in it back in college, but he writes really compellingly about his own inner experience. It's super helpful. There's a section in the Confessions, it's in book 3, where he's like 16 to 18 years old at this point, and he's talking about his kind of struggle with lust. He says, I was not yet in love, but I was in love with love. My longing was to love and be loved, but most when I obtained the enjoyment of the body of the person who loved me. And he says, thus I polluted the stream of friendship with the hell of lust. He then goes on later. This struggle with lust lasted for a long time. And in book 8, when he's at the age of 31, and this is a famous Augustine quote, he says that he was postponing. He said, I kept postponing giving up this world's happiness to devote myself to the search for that which is better than all the body's pleasures. The search for God is what he's talking about. And that would be better. Even just the search for God is better than the body's pleasures. But he's postponing it. He keeps giving it up, or giving up going after. He says, I begged God for chastity, saying, grant me chastity and continence, but not yet. For I was afraid that you would hear my prayer too soon, and too soon would heal me from the disease of lust, which I wanted satisfied rather than extinguished. And if that doesn't ring true for anybody who struggled with it, I don't know what does.
Whew. Why don't people quote that kind of Augustine towards us? Wow, that's
seriously.
Jeepers.
Grant me chastity, but not yet. I mean, that is like the realist.
Yeah, totally.
The other part of our cold opener is from Beekner. He says, lust is the craving for salt of a man dying of thirst.
Ugh. Wow.
So let's get into it. Let's do a little sketch of lust here. As we're going to see going through, especially these first 3 vices that are going to be lust, gluttony, and greed, we're going to be talking about them as like a desire that is actually a good desire, but that has gotten kind of out of whack. Something that is really disordered, that's taking up too much space in the soul, in the mind, in the energy. And so gluttony, as we're going to see, is going to be about a disordered desire for consuming things. And greed is going to be about a disordered desire for acquiring things. But we start with lust.
And you're saying, I'm going to interrupt you here, Reed.
Yeah.
What you're saying is that consumption or acquisition are a natural part of things. They are not bad in and of themselves. It's the
not at all.
Gluttony and greed become the disordering of these kind of amoral, natural, not good, not bad. Consumption is a part of how we live. Acquisition is a part of what we do, but the disorder of those things.
Correct. So like with greed, it's like we all want security, right? We want provision. We want to make sure we're going to have enough and be taken care of. That's perfectly good. But then it gets out of whack, and that's all we become obsessed with, just having things for the sake of having things. So does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Thanks.
Yeah. So with lust, we're talking about pleasure. A disordered desire for pleasure, and specifically sexual pleasure, as is well known. Lust is not actually the most complicated of the vices. And actually, in a lot of classical thought, it is seen as the first or one of the first vices. It's like the entry level vice. Like in Dante's Inferno, which I read with my friends Alan and Brad and Derek, shout out, years ago. Lust is actually, it's the first thing you get to when you come in from what he describes limbo. And then in order of severity, lust is actually like the least severe. They talk about lust as a vice of weakness instead of malice. Like it's just a natural appetite that we have for something good. And just a disclaimer off the top, the Bible, as we have talked about many times, endorses the body. The body is good. Bodily things are good. Sex is a good thing in the world of the biblical mind. Also, don't forget that the Bible also warns against a lack of restraint and boundaries when it comes to these good things. So it's good, but also with proper place and time. And so lust is like that desire for a good thing that's kind of getting out of whack. And we begin a slippery descent from what is like a quote unquote harmless indulgence of pleasure to then something that becomes all consuming. A book that we're going to be talking about throughout the series that I've been referencing a lot. It's my favorite one specifically on vices. It's called Glittering Vices by Rebecca Conan DeYoung. We're just going to short it to Rebecca DeYoung. She says this. She says, lust is the habit of trying to engineer my own happiness for myself on my own terms. My own pleasure is the goal, and I decide where to get it and when and with whom. My life revolves around my desires and wants and needs. So when this pursuit of pleasure for its own sake starts to get out of whack, these other aspects of relationship that are meant to be interwoven with sexual pleasure, like actual connection, intimacy, real responsibility, those become unimportant and we can kind of just jettison them because all we're after is the experience of pleasure in and of itself. And many people over the centuries have noticed this peculiar sort of paradox about pleasure, and that is that you can't really get it trying to seek it directly. You can't just set out and just take pleasure and have it be genuinely pleasurable, because genuine pleasure, or like a deep satisfaction, it comes as the result of doing good things in the right ways, and that's going to involve commitment, that's going to involve sacrifice, that's going to involve long-term, sustained effort, deliberate effort, and commitment. I think about it like, Marty, okay, so we're about the same age. You remember the era of Nintendo and Game Genie?
Oh, baby, do I. Oh, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what the Game Genie is or was.
Well, Game Genie, I was thinking Nintendo. Game Genie. Do I remember?
No, Nintendo. It was an accessory you would get for Nintendo games. Do you remember what it did?
I don't remember the Game Genie part of it. No.
You were too pure-hearted.
I was probably too pure, of course.
Brent, do you know about Game Genie?
Vaguely. If I'm thinking of the right thing, it's like an insert where you have a bunch of different games and you can just like flip some switches.
Yeah.
Am I thinking of the right thing?
You are thinking of the right thing. It was like so you remember Nintendo games, you'd slip them into the machine.
Yeah.
Well, the Game Genie was like a cartridge, like a little frame basically that you would slip the game into, and then you would put the Game Genie into your Nintendo. So it would make the game, normally the games would go in and the little cover would flip down, and but the Game Genie would force them to kind of stick out. Anyway, Game Genie was basically just like this database of all the cheat codes for all the Nintendo games. And so you could go in and be like, well, I'm playing Metroid. And then you would put in whatever the code was, and it would basically just let you play God mode on all of the different Nintendo games. I never had one, but one of my neighbors, he had a Game Genie. And I remember thinking, like, this is going to be the coolest thing ever because we can just have all the power-ups right off the bat, all this kind of thing. And you know how it is, like, or if you've ever, it doesn't have to just be Game Genie, but like if you've ever played video games and you use the cheat code, we used to do this also with SimCity. There was like a code you could put in to get infinite money and just build everything you wanted to build. It sucks playing video games that way, right?
So yeah, I can remember there was I used to play World of Warcraft with like a whole group of us. We'd do all these LAN parties and stuff. And there was one time where somebody had their own server, and I don't know, I'm sure it was probably against the rules what we had set up, but somebody had their own, like it was our server, and they had ways that you had coded things to where you could travel anywhere in the blink of an instant. You basically had unlimited hit points. And yeah, it was like the coolest thing for about 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you were like, well, what do I do now? It was so lame. Totally lame.
Yes. That is kind of my analogy for this idea about trying to just get pleasure for the sake of pleasure. Like, it seems super promising up front, and then you get into it and it devoid of like the actual attachment to work, to responsibility, to all of those things that come along that are meant to come along with it. It just is like really empty really quickly. And with lust, when it becomes habitual, it's like you just keep going back to, like, you plug it in, you turn it on, you do the Game Genie thing, and you're like, well, this is lame. And then you turn it off. And then, like, the next day, you're like, oh, but this time it's going to be good. And you just keep seeking pleasure for the sake of pleasure. And there's this, like, horrible, dark irony that, like, the more you try to chase it, the more you become unable of actually being satisfied. Does that make sense?
Yep, totally.
With some of these vices, just to help us sketch this out a little bit more, we're going to be looking at, in the intro, Marty, we talked about Thomas Aquinas and kind of his work thinking about vices.
Yep.
And he would name these sort of, like, he called them daughters, of the capital vice. So capital vice here is lust. And then there would be these, I guess, these consequences, or even these, like, kind of sinful behaviors that would follow from the vice of lust. And I want to know if any of these ring true to you in your experiences. This is for either of you. And so I'm just going to go through, there are like 5 or 6 of these. The first one that he talks about, he calls it blindness of the mind, where when lust has kind of gotten its claws into you, you start to lose the ability to appreciate or consider kind of anything beyond the flesh. It's just things of the flesh. They start to become sort of like blinders to everything else, right? And you, like, become unconcerned with the real good that is around you because you become kind of, I guess, obsessed with, like, sexual things.
Yeah, and when you're in that space, part of the difference between what I might call and I'm probably getting ahead of our conversation right now, but like fake relationships, the lustful relationship.
Yeah.
And what I might have with my wife.
Yeah.
And not just to make it sexual, but when I'm in that fake relationship space, there's no story.
Mm-hmm.
There's no context. There's no emotion, feeling. It's a blindness of the mind because it's only the one thing. It's like one channel. There's no complexity. There's no color. There's no dance.
Well, I'm glad you said the word context. I mean, thinking of it as a story, to me, it feels like, if you're into the MCU and you just go straight to the battle scene every time, and if you just watch like a highlight reel of battle scenes, like, that seems like it will be super exciting, but it's actually really ungratifying. But then if you keep indulging that, you start to lose even a care for the flavor of the context, right? You're like, I'm bored with the conversation that they had, I'm bored with, like, the long, slow scene setting shot. Like, just give me the stuff where
correct
people are getting punched in the face by Iron Man.
You could even be like an expert in, like, all the fight scenes from every single movie because you've watched them so many times and but you've lost the arc and the narrative and everything that matters.
Yeah. So again, it's this picture of something that's cyclical. We're returning to it, but we're actually never getting the real marrow out of the thing. It's only ever this kind of pale surface level sort of thing. That's what, like, lust does to our human relationships. Aquinas also names thoughtlessness, and he actually has these distinct, I was reading through thoughtlessness and rashness, but I see them as fairly similar. And that's basically like what lust does to you in making you a really impulsive creature, where you are, like, sort of driven by your appetite rather than you being able to master it and be in control of it. And it's also like a sort of you're only thinking about the next second. You're not thinking about, like, what is this going to do to my life a day from now or a week from now? What's it going to do to my relationships, a week from now? It's just all you can see because lust is making you rash. Another one is what he calls inconstancy, which basically just means it is like your will starts to get weaker and weaker, where, like, what is good. It's sort of different than being rash, right? Like you actually understand what is right and good, but the more that vice gets its claws into us, the more we lose the ability to actually then decide and go with what is good. And it starts little by little. It's bit by bit. The will starts to get eroded until we find ourselves kind of totally conquered by the thing.
Maybe another way to put this would be in the inverse, to think like, in order to be a part of the good, there is a choice that gets made. We choose to give ourselves to it. So when you stop doing that, it erodes, like it becomes harder and harder and harder to be a part of the good thing. It becomes more difficult.
In the intro episode, I mean, the overarching idea here with vice and virtue is we're talking about living as the image of God, like rightly in the world, right? Being partnered with God, being the kind of people God wants us to be. And it seems like whichever way you're sliding on the spectrum, like, am I going more towards like the image of God, or am I going away from that? It's happening incrementally, like small choices, right? So like when we talk about lives of faithfulness and doing the right thing, don't look for some big grand swing. It's little by little we make these decisions. And so when we indulge the vices, and especially here we're talking about lust, even just bit by bit, it has a cumulative effect over time that we can't see at first. So I have teenage boys, and they struggle like anybody does with like the lusts of the flesh. And the conversations that we have are sort of, I sometimes feel like the old man down the road where I'm like, you can't see where all of this is going, but heed the wisdom, right? Just like bit by bit is how these things end up mastering us, not in some big one-time thing all at once. The next one, actually the next two I'll talk about, these are the last two with Aquinas, the sort of outworkings of the vice of lust, is one is like a self-love, like a growing self-love, a turning inward, where I start to mostly just think of me and my own desire for pleasure. And what happens then to other people is that they become objects to satisfy whatever it is that I am after. And then also, I thought this one was it's getting its claws into me and thinking about like, this is a tough word for me, and I think a tough word for the culture. Aquinas talks about it as hatred of God. But what he means is that there is this growing resentment for Aquinas toward God. Maybe if people don't believe in God, then it's toward, whatever the moral, ethical fabric of the universe is. But you resent God because restraint of desire, that word restraint, is like such a tough word for us.
Yeah.
But that becomes intolerable and detestable. And what we're always looking for then is like, what's a reason, what's an excuse that I can make for why restraint shouldn't have to apply to me in the here and now? Because, in some ways, like, I don't want to paint a picture of God where God's just looking to kill everybody's fun, but there is like the life that God calls us to involves actually saying no to ourselves at times, restraint. And the lustful, the person that has let themselves go to the vice of lust, looks at God and basically just sees, they see God as like a big buzzkill in the sky that's like, stop trying to ruin my fun. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, this is a hard word because a lot of times the spaces that we're in are having conversations, like we're reacting against something, and the danger is an overcorrection. So as we critique or think critically about purity culture,
totally,
you swing the pendulum to like this total lack of restraint.
Yep.
Complete freedom, which lacks wisdom. It's like the other side of foolishness.
Yeah, we're going to get to that here in just a couple minutes. We're going to have the culture conversation, especially with the way the church and the culture have sort of pinballed off of each other. The last thing I want to point out in just like the sort of viciousness of lust as a vice, and I think what's kind of unique to it from some other of the vices, and we'll see as we go on, and we'll talk about it through this series, how the vices, they all are kind of connected and they overlap. Like there's not always a super clean, like lust and gluttony, their original desire, one is about sex, one is about consumption and food. They're very different, but the more they get distorted, the more they start to look like each other and sound like each other. But with lust, I think the tough thing, the really dangerous thing, is that it's the vice that uses people most directly. So like what I'm saying is gluttony is about, at its most basic level, it's about food, right? And greed is about money. But the vice of lust is its perniciousness is that somebody's own body becomes an object for my gratification. And I think that's where, and we'll get in when we start talking about like the rippling effects of this. It has such a powerful capacity to destroy how I see human beings around me and how I relate to them and how I want to relate to them. You start to see how it becomes a very deadly thing. It's just a question that I think is worth talking about, circling back to if what we're after is a good thing. What is it? What is the good desire that we have that lust grabs hold of and distorts and destroys? I mean, I've got a few notes here, but you got any thoughts on this?
I mean, intimacy, relationship, and you could talk about the specific nature of sex, but it's bigger than that. It's connection. Mm-hmm. It's all of that. I think when you were reading stuff earlier, I had to like check myself of like, oh, is it desire? Is it pleasure? Is it like maybe those things? Maybe I've automatically actually associated some of those things with such a negative connotation. I don't recognize that there's even some good in them as well.
Desire is good, man. Desire is good. That's the thing, is like, even to want sex is a perfectly good thing, to want sexual pleasure. And I think you're absolutely right that in hitting on the intimacy thing and hitting on, I think about what we probably want deep down is not just sexual intimacy, because I think a lot of us find that in quick or cheap ways, and when it's done, it's like, well, that's not actually very satisfying. But what we want is like a deep and abiding connection with somebody. I was thinking about, and this, this is my own weird brain, but like we go through most of our lives inside our own heads, and which is an isolated kind of experience. We think our own thoughts, we feel our own pain. When we feel excitement or when we feel desire or joy or grief, we alone experience that within ourselves. Right. And I think what we want is to know that like we can reach out and connect with somebody and be known by them. Like nobody wants to be alone. And like sexual union is a way that, it is a way of just getting bodily pleasure. But I think what we're looking for deep down is we want to be known as human beings. Not just as sexual creatures, but sexual activity. That's a way of like trying to get at like the deep humanness of a person. And that is all very good. And so then lust comes in and it's like, yeah, but forget about the connection stuff. Forget about that. But really what you want, really what you need, all you need to get by or to really be satisfied is just that immediate experience of the pleasure. And then it's like whatever gives you the pleasure, and whether or not that you don't have to be connected to that person deeply to get an experience of like sexual pleasure from them. And then like you're into the cycle, you're spiraling down. So I want to move into then talking about, there's many, many resources. Lots of people have examined the nature or the relationship of, American church and its relationship to sex and sexuality going all the way back to, the sexual revolution in the 60s. And I'm not trying to give like a detailed account of all of that, but just conversationally, what are some ways that our church culture, the church culture of our generation, Marty and Brent, has complicated our wrestling match with lust, sex, and sexuality?
Well, I did a whole episode of this years ago, which still plagues me because the emails don't stop rolling in. So I still don't have thoughts tied up. I get really close to ranty when I start waxing eloquent about this.
Okay.
I mean, part of it is we have not taken responsibility for the way culture has progressed, I think is over the years how I've come to repackage one of my main thoughts, which is post-industrial revolution. But like culture has continued to move on, and we keep moving further and further away from the way our bodies, our physical bodies, have functioned or been designed to function, or how biology works and how biology relates to sociology and what's appropriate and what's acceptable culturally. All of those things are fine. I'm not suggesting that those are the wrong things, but we also haven't been honest about what that costs us, about what it does to our development as young adults, men and women. So now your body is going through whatever changes we want to talk about at whatever age, but it's younger than culturally the rest of our development is moving on. So now you have college, And most of our parents would tell us like, well, you can't get married till like get your education done, then get married. And like the timeline just keeps elongating itself and warring against, which is fine if we were honest about the war, but we're not honest about the war. We just kind of act like, well, this is just about morality. And we just keep serving some of these the gods of mammon without realizing what the fallout of that is. I think maybe that was the safest way I've ever said that. Probably not. I'll probably get some email.
And it wasn't even a rant. It wasn't even a rant at all. And, you know, I want to, I'll keep bringing us back to this just as a quick side disclaimer or qualification, I guess. And that is, like, I want our tone, our tenor throughout these conversations to be, like, we're not here to be judgmental. We're not here to throw stones. Like, we are here to try to talk honestly about things that are difficult and, like, and sympathetically, because, I mean... Brent, as we have done these, even though this one is being recorded out of order, I mean, we talk pretty much every single week. And it's like, oh, man, I thought maybe I was going to talk about a vice that wasn't my vice, you know? And the fact is that we're all struggling in various ways, I think, with all of these. And so, yeah, I mean, we're that's just maybe I should have said that earlier on in like a preface, but we're trying to be sympathetic, open, like we're not trying to be judgmental about anything or ranty.
Right. Yeah. And let me add to, because I can see your notes. Maybe this will serve as a good segue. Because the reason why I even was like, even when you asked me that question, Reed, and I was like, well, I mean, I don't want to talk about it because I get ranty. Like, there's a reason why I'm not like that, but there's a few topics. And this is one of them, which is connected to also what you're asking me which is, do not screw this topic up. Not in the church. You lose everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether we're talking about careers as pastors or people in churches, it's not just pastors and content creators. It's people in pews. It's youth and youth groups. It's you screw up on the sex and lust thing. You don't come back from that. You screw up on money. No one even knows. Who cares? You screw up on gluttony. Yeah. Nobody's doing a youth group lesson on gluttony. You do something wrong, lust, and whoa.
Which is interesting because, you know, what we said earlier, like this is actually in the desert, you know, fathers and mothers like tradition and going back classically, like lust is sort of the, like we said, that's the first level, you know, that's not even like, that's not the worst by far if you want to try to rank them, which again, may be a silly exercise. But some of the other things that we just indulge more openly, greed, I'll throw that one out there, that we don't call out in the church, those are actually like more dangerous to us and to our communities. But I do think, Marty, I think we've been given, it's been tough because we talk out of both sides of our mouth a little bit, where sex is talked about as like the zenith of human relationship, right? Like this is the pinnacle of a human experience you can have with another person, is like sexual relationship. But also it's like got all of this baggage, and it's like this deep source of shame in church culture where it's sort of like, don't talk about it, don't think about it, don't engage with it. But then you get married, like all bets are off and just whatever you want, whenever you want, you know, and it's going to be the greatest thing that's ever happened to you, I promise. And I found this quote hit me, dude. This was there's a book I've been reading, The Cardinal and the Deadly by Carl Clifton Soderstrom. And he's quoting somebody else, a guy named Simon Black, who there was a series of books on vices. And he wrote the one on lust. And this is the line. It says, when something is both intensely desirable and culturally identified as intensely shameful, we can expect psychic turmoil.
Whew. Yeah.
Psychic turmoil is exactly the way to describe what so many of us have been through. Because, yes, it is intensely desirable, but culturally, in our church culture, like it has been in some circles labeled as intensely shameful. And it's like, oh, man, like, I'm struggling so much with this, but I don't know what to do. And I feel like I'm the worst person in the world because lust is my vice. And we just get trapped in it, you know, because we can't talk about it.
Yeah. And it's not just connected to like ignorance or youthful naivete or immaturity, because how many friends do I have in my 40s and 50s that are going on their second marriage? Or so this is like, it's not even their first time into this conversation. They've even They've been around the block, maybe not even in great ways, a couple times, and they still are deeply rooted in some form of they deal with deep shame, deep insecurities. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I've seen a few headlines scroll by recently. I haven't actually looked into this, so maybe I'm completely misreading whatever this is about, but it's something about Generation X being obsessed with sex more than any other generation. And I think about the churches that I've been in and what the culture has been like in those churches, where this conversation is like, oh, we got to deal with this battle. We got to take care of this. And there's been put so much time into it that it's almost working against like what we talk about with the Creating a Space episode and the whole session 7 of the podcast, where like we should be making space for God and letting God fill that. But instead, we're not making that space at all. We're trying so hard to like close down and like keep this lust stuff away from us. And then it's that bit by bit thing where it's like, oh, well, it was just this one little thing. And just those cracks slowly form out. And so, yeah, it's almost like we're focusing on it too much, because I don't struggle with lust as much as some of the other vices. Maybe most of the other vices, as I'm starting to learn.
Wow, Brent, finally an episode where you can just breathe easy.
I mean, not quite, but I found myself in all these church settings where it's like, this is all we're ever talking about. And then I found myself struggling with it way more because it's the only thing on my mind. So I would say my experience of church culture in it is very strange and has actually made it worse, because there's just this over-indexing on, I mean, like Marty was saying, like, this is the thing you do not do. Like the other stuff, whatever, we can kind of shrug it off or even ignore it. But this is the one thing. And so this obsession with trying to deal with it actually makes it worse, at least for me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that experience for sure. I mean, we're going to keep coming back to the word tension, which I know is kind of like a fad in vogue word, but it really is like when it comes to navigating, because what we're talking about is a good desire on one hand and a distortion on the other end. We've got to examine like where the sweet spot is in the tension. And so like if we just stop talking about it, or like decide, well, we've been way too tight, and so now we're just going to let up, to the extent that the ethic, the sexual ethic, is contra, you know, sort of the no stakes, like casual hookup sexual revolution culture, like it's probably good that we're pushing back against that. But like you know, there's The Four Loves is like a famous book from C.S. Lewis about different kinds of human relationships. And in the introduction to it, he's actually quoting a guy named Rougemont, who is a writer, and Lewis is kind of affirming what this guy said. He says, love ceases to be a demon only when he ceases to be a god. And so, like, we've got to stop making it like this is the best thing that can ever happen to you. Because, of course, then what happens? Like, what happens when you have people where you're saying this is the best thing that can happen to you, but you can't have it? Then it creates this, like, well, this psychic turmoil. And, like, you go and you seek it out however you can get it, but you just kind of do it in the dark or in secret. Buechner's got a good line on this. He says, contrary to Mrs. Grundy, who I had to look this up, Mrs. Grundy is just sort of like was a pop culture sort of symbol from like the 19th century that became like a symbol of like somebody who's really prudish and priggish, you know, and uptight. So he says, contrary to Mrs. Grundy, sex is not sin. Contrary to Hugh Hefner, it's not salvation either. Like nitroglycerin, it can be used either to blow up bridges or heal hearts. Did you know that nitroglycerin is actually used as medicine?
I did not.
I believe I somehow knew that in the back recesses of my mind, had a medicinal purpose to it.
Yeah, if you like it, they use it for unclogging arteries.
Oh, yeah.
And so
Wow.
but like it's an amazing, you know, analogy that it can either be used very destructively or to heal.
Yeah.
And you know, as we're going to be talking about again and again, the tension comes like we figure it out in communities with the people who are around us in our families and in our churches and our friend circles, and being really honest and diligent with each other. Okay, so how here in this particular situation? Like, is this blowing up a bridge or is this healing a heart? You know, and doing the hard work of walking through that together in our communities. I want to get to a couple other cultural sort of like, I think, attitudes about sex what do you think? And I struggle with this one, knowing how to answer it. But like Marty or Brent, what do you think about the line? Well, like as long as no one gets hurt, then it's fine.
Obviously, I'm greatly annoyed at the reasoning. It's just such such an anemic logic. Like what we would want, what good ethics would lead to is more human flourishing, which is one of those buzzwords that's becoming in vogue as well. But
dude, yes, that is a great point. Go say more about that.
Well, like what we want is like more humanity. What we want is more human flourishing. What we want is more people being more of who they were created to be. Like all of us were made to be 100% and we're running less than that, but we would want to be more, as close to 100% of what God desires for us as possible. But as long as no one gets hurt, is like this, like it's like the opposite energy.
Yeah.
It's like, well, is it bad enough? Rather than is it good enough? And so you keep getting sold some false God. But yeah.
Dude, that's good. That's really good. I did not think about that, but that's like that is just a sad, anemic picture of like, well, yeah, as long as we're like, not hurt. And I'm like, is this helping you actually be the best that you can be? Flourishing is such a good word. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it's a lie anyway, because there is hurt that's coming. It just doesn't seem like it in the moment.
Sure.
Yeah. Buechner talks about that, and he's like, in the end, like, who's to say who gets hurt and who doesn't get hurt? And maybe the only person who actually gets hurt is you. Like, there's an internal hurt that you carry. But like, I think, are we being honest about it? It goes back to your previous question, Marty. Like, are we actually being honest enough about what counts as hurt? What about the like? So long as you love each other.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost like the same. That one is at least stated in the positive, but it's still like a negative bar. Like it's still like how low can we? Like what's the bottom? What's the floor? Rather than what's the ceiling?
What's our minimum requirement just so we can do what we want to do here?
Yeah, right.
It's a great argument in English where there's only one word that applies to so many different things.
Yeah, right.
Wait, say more about that, Brent, because that's actually what I was thinking. But what do you mean?
The word love in English can mean just this huge range of feelings and commitments and everything. Yeah.
I love tacos, baby.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true, right? Because the question is like, I have heard middle schoolers talk to me about how like they use the word love like in texting. Like it'll be somebody that you met a day ago and like you kind of like, will you go out with me? And it's like, oh, I love you. And I'm like, well, that's like, do you know what you mean by that? And they're like, well, what do you want me to like? What do you think we should say? I like you. And I was like, yes. And I'm like, well, that would be weird. But like, this idea of, do we know what love is in its fullest sense, and are we going for its fullest sense, or again, like, is it? And I really don't want to be the ranty old man here, but there is something to be said for the different distinctions in love. And are we just talking about the one that basically that's gonna get me in bed anyway? Like it's like that supercharged, and that is good. I don't want to say it's bad, right? But it's in this whole context of the different kinds of loves operating together that we find the real thing. Okay, there is just this one paragraph from Buechner in this essay he wrote called The Two Loves that I think is so good and actually speaks to what you're kind of saying, Marty, about like, are we going for flourishing and settling? And so I just want to read it, and this is what he says. He says, our society is filled with people, and he wrote this in 1969, by the way. And I think this is still true. Our society is filled with people for whom the sexual relationship is one where body meets body, but where person fails to meet person. Where the immediate need for sexual gratification is satisfied, but where the deeper need for companionship and understanding is left untouched. The result is that the relationship leads not to fulfillment, but to a half-conscious sense of incompleteness, of inner loneliness, which is so much the sickness of our time. And what he's trying to say, the point is, he says, this isn't about morality. This isn't about like, what is the most moral, the most pure way of doing this or some rule. He said it just that the way we do this isn't working for us. Like it's not leading us to better lives.
Yeah, that's a pretty good quote.
All right, so let's get into the text conversation a little bit then. And here I'm going to be kind of shamelessly ripping off a lesson from Rob Bell. Remember his old Pneuma series of
I was in high school.
his bleached tips on his hair are obviously a bad look, but the idea is actually pretty awesome. So shout out Rob for like, let's give some dignity to the craft of sermon and like make it this cool artsy film production thing. I know people have various feelings about Rob Bell, but I think I can pretty confidently say, you know, this stuff from, gosh, is this 20 years ago?
It would have been 2002, 2003.
20 plus years ago, these Nooma, Nooma series came out, and I think they're worth checking out, and I think can safely, confidently like recommend these things. So he's got this one called Flame, where it's like the cold sort of winter, like all the trees are dead, and he's driving out to like the woods, and he's talking about different words for love that occur in the Hebrew, specifically in the book of Song of Songs, right? In the Old Testament or in the Hebrew scriptures, this is probably the thing that people most think about when we're talking about sex and lust, etc., relationships. And he says there are 3 different Hebrew words that are functioning at various points in the book of Song of Songs. And then you also find them at other places in the Hebrew scriptures. And each one kind of describes a different sort of love or way that we relate to each other. So the first one is the word, you got the pronunciation, Marty, you know it better. Raya. Okay. And so he describes this as like it's somebody that you hang out with. So yeah, Song of Songs 4 and verse 7. Can you give us that one, Brent?
You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you.
Okay, so that word, my darling, that actually at various other times it refers to maidens. Like, it's your crew. It's the people you hang out with. It's your people you pal around with.
Let me add to that, because I've heard this taught by some other teachers too. Same idea.
Yeah.
But I think it actually connects to what we've been talking about earlier in this episode. So on like just a regular interpersonal level, this is your friend. This is your neighbor. This is your posse. This is the people.
Yep.
On a romantic level, it's the infatuation. It's the electric poetry, which I love because this is like the base entry level. This isn't the deepest level. This is like, I don't want to call it cheap, but this is the foyer to the house. And it's what we always think is like, that's the good stuff. But in the Hebrew, this same word would be like, well, that's the friendship level, right?
Yeah, but I mean, dude, that electricity, like, I remember when Leanne and I were first starting to date, summer of 2002, and that was like the waters we were swimming in, and it was awesome.
This is the wedding talk I give at most all my weddings, and I always talk, this is, the raya is the level where you're like, you hang up first. No, you hang up first.
Dude, yes.
I love you more. No, I love you more. And that's the raya level.
And us old men need to not look down at teenagers and be like, well, that's silly. Like, no way, dude. That stuff is amazing. What we have to teach our younger people is that, like, that's also not everything.
Yeah, and I shouldn't even call it levels. I hate that I even use the word level, because it's not level. It's one part. It's 3 parts, not 3 levels.
Yes. And so as Rob is talking about this, he's got a lighter, right? He's flickering like a lighter flame. And he's like, this is one kind of flame. It's one kind of fire. The next one is this ahava? Ahava?
Yep, you got it. Ahava.
Ahava, which is in Song of Songs in chapter 8, verse 7, Brent.
Yeah, I'm going to actually start in verse 6 because I think it kind of ties into this whole idea. Place me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death. Its jealousy unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Many waters cannot quench love. Rivers cannot sweep it away. If one were to give all the wealth of one's house for love, it would be utterly scorned.
I mean, that poetry is powerful and speaks for itself. But you get a little bit of a different sense than like the people who just come over to like watch the Chiefs and Bengals play, right? Like this is like an abiding, lasting companionship. I don't know what part of if we're talking about a house, you know, if Raya is the entryway, I mean, this feels like the foundation.
Yeah, I was going to say living room, but I think it's even the kitchen. Like this is the.
Oh, yes.
This is where everything, I will be here no matter what. When I do the wedding talk, I always say there's the electricity and the poetry. The problem is that will come and go over the course of your life together. What Ahava speaks to is no matter what comes, tragedy, whether my feelings die out, whether there is no poetry and electricity, I'll choose to love you anyway, because you cannot quench love. The grave can't stop it. You can't, like, it will go on no matter what. It's the commitment.
Yes, the commit, and this is another. It's not necessarily we're not ranking them better or worse, right? It's just this is a different kind of flame.
Yep.
And you could imagine like there is a cold giving up version of this that is devoid of the electricity and the spark, right? Where it's like, yep, well, I'm with you no matter what. I don't really like you, but like I'll still be here, you know.
Yep.
And so there's this other flame, and then there is the flame that maybe applies most to our conversation with the vice of lust, and that is the word dode, which is the word for lover or for lovemaking. Actually, when I looked up the blue letter on this, it said it comes from a root that means to boil, and so it's hot, it's boiling. Song of Songs 1 verse 2 is the reference I have here, Brent.
Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. For your love is more delightful than wine.
Yeah, so love there, we're talking about this kind of love. We're talking about the physical, the intimacy, the sexual relationship. Marty, what's your wedding take on that?
Yeah, I don't spend a whole lot of time because of the nature of a wedding ceremony and people feeling uncomfortable. I just kind of do this one in passing, but...
We know.
That's why I hated the word levels, because this isn't levels. This is all different parts of the same house. This is now the bedroom. Or the point that Rob's going to be making that I'm sure you're headed towards. But these are three parts that when you have them all.
Yes.
Sometimes you feel like you only have one of the three or two of the three. And sometimes that's enough. But it's designed to be all three of these things together.
Yeah. And so in the video, he's got this Bic lighter and he's talking about, you know, these different kinds of these little flames. And he's like, but when they're all present in the same relationship, he ignites this huge bonfire. And this is the representation of the Raya and the Ahava and the Dode all being present in the same relationship. And it's this massive thing. And it says the fire in this film had flames reaching heights of over 200 feet that could be seen from more than 10 miles away. And this is why I actually think Rob Bell, I mean, these Newman things are genius, right? Because what a picture. And you want to talk about if what we're going for is human flourishing and like how does our sexual relationship, like how does it contribute to the flourishing? Is it intermingled with those other things? And is it bringing about that? Because that is something that is desirable and good, right? And that is bright and that actually, I think, is a way of bearing the image of God in the world and of partnering with God and what God wants to do in the world. And so there's that from the Song of Songs. Anything else on that conversation, Marty?
Not on that one. I think we should give a few more textual examples for all those people just black out and their eyesight goes white with rage whenever they hear the name Rob Bell. So we should probably give some non-Rob Bell textual examples here too.
Yeah, totally. Speaking to, well, the whole integration of the person, I just want to touch lightly on this. Much has been said about this, but looking at the creation story, right, and the theme of nakedness, we have already said sex is good. The whole of physical creation is certified as good by God in the story. But what I see when I read that story is that it's not good per se simply because it is physical. In the story, they're like flesh of fleshness, you know, and he's like, this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, their nakedness. It is interwoven with all that they are told to be together, right? The shared responsibility that they have to lean against each other, you know, going back to that older Bama episode, to be fruitful and to multiply, like all of these things are meant to interweave, and the goodness springs from the whole, both the physical, the spiritual, the relational, all of that. And you notice in the story that the impulse to hide their nakedness, it is part and parcel with the deception and the blaming. And so what I'm trying to say is that like the quote unquote spiritual dimension totally affects the physical one. They are interwoven together.
Yeah, their physicality is a part of some larger soulness about them.
Yes.
The physicality is not the center of gravity. The physicality actually is revolving around some larger center of gravity, but it is a part of the goodness revolving around it.
Totally. Yeah. What happens, you know, in the body affects the soul and vice versa.
Yep.
It's all interconnected. The last thing that I want to bring up in the text conversation is this is probably the verse that I would bet when people hear the word lust or think of the vice of lust, this is probably what they most think of, and that is from the Sermon on the Mount. Let's just pull up this passage and read. Is this 5? Is it Matthew 5?
Yeah, 5, starting in verse 27. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell.
Yeah. I love that passage. That's the one that always, that was beaten into us when we were youngins in church, Reed, that's for sure.
Yeah, it sounds terrifying. It's so violent. It's so graphic.
Yeah.
But any sensibility that's like, yeah, just like whatever goes, man. Like when it comes to our sexuality, like Jesus clearly is in favor of some kind of restraint, obviously. But Marty, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on this passage. Like, I know you've got some good stuff on Sermon on the Mount things.
Yeah. The larger thing we always talked about back in the day is that I was always taught this was Jesus raising the bar. Like in Torah, the bar was here, but now, like, don't commit adultery, but now you can't even lust, which is always like, again, you said the word terrifying is the right word.
Right.
And yet I think what Jesus is trying to get at is you can have all the rules straight and you can have it all memorized and still miss the greater point. And so what Jesus is doing is fulfilling. He's trying to show us how to properly interpret. So this idea of adultery or these relationships is actually about how we see, and in the context of the conversation we're having today, I think it's so helpful because it's the whole human being. It's the whole experience. It's all the stuff that we are shortchanging when we engage in lust. And Jesus is trying to get at this. This is about how we see the humanity. What was the part earlier in our discussion today where we were talking about the blindness of the mind and the intellect?
Yeah. Yep.
You cannot commit adultery and still be deep in lust and your mind blinded. So Jesus is like, there's a deeper principle here, which is that be completely engaged and see the people as people, see the woman as a woman, as somebody's daughter, as somebody's wife, as just her, as who she is, and like just see her humanity. And I think Jesus is calling us to that.
Yeah.
Not raising the bar, but a deep, not up, but like a deep-seated, this is what the law was always trying to connect us to.
Totally. That's such a good point. We're going to be talking through the series. We already mentioned in the intro about how, vices and virtues are about other people. It's like you said this throughout the Sermon on the Mount. I remember this from years ago, Marty. You're like, it's about other people. It's about other people.
Yep.
And a lot of these vices, really, it's not just about becoming some morally perfect, like, exemplar. It is about how we see other people. One of the things, just when it comes to, for those of us who have a habit, whatever our particular manifestation of the vice of lust is, I talk about college guys about this a lot, but it's like, what is this indulgence, or what is this this thing? What does it do to my view of a person? There was a writer, David Foster Wallace, who wrote years ago. He did an essay where he went to the adult film industry awards and just wrote about it for like Harper's Magazine or something. I do not recommend this to people who might struggle with like thoughts of the mind, because he doesn't really hold back in his just like description, but he's not trying to like hold it up in a glorious way. He is like taking the veneer off and saying like, this is what this does to people within the industry. This is what happens to women especially, but also men. And he just paints this like really honest but bleak picture of what the lust of vice and its various products does to the way that we regard other human beings. And that will make you like, oh man, I need to think twice about the kinds of things that I am indulging. What are you thinking, Brent?
I'm just thinking like, what is the hope here? What can we do about this?
Yeah. We're going to try to talk about that with each of these vices, talk about what helps. There's this great line that I found from St. John Climacus. He says, "Do not imagine that you will overwhelm the demon of fornication by entering into an argument with him. Nature is on his side, and he has the best of the argument." Meaning, like if lust is something we struggle with, just simply logic and willpower aren't going to help us a lot.
Yeah.
There's this great verse in Proverbs chapter 6 that says, "Can a man carry fire close to his chest without his clothes being burned?" You can't play with this stuff. And so I think the first thing that helps is just being honest about access. And whatever that, I mean, I'm not only talking about pornography, but just thinking about like, if I have a habit, what does access look like? Because thinking about Proverbs again, and I understand that in Proverbs, like the evil seductress woman is like a metaphor. She's a symbol for something bigger, but is also, I think, stands in for exactly this vice that we are talking about. And the advice is don't go anywhere near her house. Like, you need to run the other direction, like if you see her coming, you know? So if you pass by her house on your way to work, you need to go over a few blocks and around to make sure that you steer as clear of this as you can. And so I think just being honest about access and having other people who know about my access and like, how am I doing with that? And I mean, really treating it, because this is, let's be real, like this is an addiction for many, many people. And so treating it like an addiction of other kinds of substances and just saying like, okay, well, this is when it's trouble for me. This is what my access looks like. And then having the really hard conversation with yourself about like, you know, so again, like we're into the practical weeds here, but you know, we carry around pornography access in our pockets with our phones, and the phones are used for many great things, but having the real conversation of like, what kind of convenience would I be willing to sacrifice for some period of time in order to like help myself? Because if there is access, then I'm just going to keep giving into this vice. And then I think thinking too about like, not just, you know, it's not just pornography, but like our broader media diet and what that fosters in us in terms of like how we relate to our own desires. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, because I had a long and spirited conversation with one of our students, shout out Lawson Huff, about this. And I was talking about how my youngest kid, likes to watch these unboxing videos like of Lego sets on YouTube. And I was like, this is just like pornography. It's a different subject matter, but I think it has a similar effect where it enables you to kind of indulge a desire without having to actually engage the reality of it. Like, porn is to lust, as Food Network is to gluttony, as unboxing videos and catalogs are to greed, right? Where it enables me to indulge it, but then the actual, you know, so when it's pornography, the less attractive aspects of bodies, the vulnerabilities and responsibilities, difficulties of maintaining good relationships, I don't have to worry about any of that. But similarly, like, you know, these kinds of other sorts of media that make me think I can have this thing without like the expense of having to buy it, or the labor of having to maintain it, or the problem of storing it or moving it, or just all the effects of waste. And so just thinking about how do I engage media in general, because it can stoke something that is related to lust within me, trying to see it holistically in the person.
That's a good point. Well said.
I also think it helps, like, the ancient church practice of confession, being able to share. Confession is a path to healing, and not confession is a festering kind of wound, which I totally know is scary because, you know, you let something out. This is something that I have done or struggled with, and you don't have any guarantees how the person across from you is going to receive that.
Yeah.
But find people who love you, who want what is best for you, and be able to like say out loud what it looks like for you. And then just trying again. Like, the thing with vices, they are by nature habitual, but they can be broken. And so we can keep trying. Like, don't let some bad Christian theology about like works-based salvation or whatever get in the way of you being doggedly determined to just keep trying again. And then I think the last thing that I would say that really helps here, Brent, is just a practice of friendship, recovering the value in the deep connective tissue of other modes of relationship. So we've got to put out that voice away from us that says like sex with another person is like the pinnacle of human. Like, that's not true. It is great, but it is not the highest that human relationships have to offer. It is one of the heights among many others. And so recover other kinds of relationship. Kathleen Norris, she wrote a book called Cloister Walk, where she writes about her experience like living among monks, and celibate monks is one of the chapters. And she says, when you cannot make love physically, you figure out other ways to do it. And so like there are other ways that we can share really meaningful, valuable experiences with other people. I mean, to elevate like a view of the whole of relationships, like we've talked about, like what does the image of God look like with this? It's that giant bonfire. What I have seen is that relationships that are not plagued by lust have the potential to be these like unalloyed human relationships where we're not mixing intentions and motives, but we can actually be good to one another and not use people as like a way to gratify, but to see everybody just truly for who they are. I mean, Kathleen Norris writes about that too. The hospitality that the monks were able to offer Like she talks about women of abuse were able to go and actually find healing in these monasteries because people who had devoted themselves to living lust-free or a celibate life. I'm not telling everybody you need to go be a monk and be celibate, but the point is that they were actually to be regarded by somebody who did not have any ulterior motives for what they might get or use from them, even like in their own leering stare or their own thought life, but that is a healing thing that we can be and do for one another to relate to each other with dignity. I think that's kind of maybe what's part of at the heart of what Jesus was saying, Marty, that you were talking about. Like, this is about the way that we see each other, and that can be healing.
Yeah, totally.
I think that's all I got on that. We can get into, we're going to be having some self-examination questions at the end of each of these episodes that if you want to just take and do something with, you, the listener, you can, or you can just leave them too. That's okay. But anything else before we get to that? Anything else to wrap up the discussion from you, Brent, or you, Marty?
I'll just point back to the idea that you guys brought up earlier of connection, like being the root desire here, that reciprocity of relationship and the disorderedness of lust being it's entirely one-sided and there's no connection there at all.
Marty, anything else from you?
Not a thing. You covered it well. You've added some color to conversations I have often had in the past.
All right. So here are some questions. Brent, I'm going to ask you to read these as you will going forward in the future.
How do my non-pornographic media consumption habits fuel an inclination to lust? Are there non-sexual ways in which I objectify others? How can I engage in deeper levels of friendship with the people in my life, including my own spouse? How can I use my energy as an opportunity to serve others in love?
Thanks for joining, you guys. I appreciate you both being on here to talk about this. Just a nice, easy, light entry into the vices.
Decent use of my time.
Yeah, pretty good place to start. Well, we do have lots of links, as we will, seemingly for all these episodes. Lots of sources if this is a particular vice that you struggle with or that you're interested in for whatever reason. Lots and lots of resources to dig into to continue this conversation. Of course, you can do that in a discussion group as well. The friendship aspect that we were talking about earlier, like the connection, like that stuff is crucial. So don't do this alone. Don't leave it alone in your head, as Reed was talking about. Get in a relationship with somebody somehow. Go to BamOnDeception.com. Check out the map. If you're this far into the podcast and you've just never engaged a discussion group, but you're like, man, I'm wrestling with this stuff. I need some community. Like, it's not too late to join a group. Like, check it out. It's on the website. You can use the contact page to get in touch with us. Everything that you need is going to be on the website. So let us know. And thank you for joining us on the BMO podcast this week. We'll talk to you again soon.